Hello, hello. Yeah, another one, another day, another video. There's something I wanted to cover. I've sort of alluded to it in other videos as my list sort of on-screen lists sort of keep changing. In this sort of meta and the way we are, I think there's two directions that Blue's still sort of going in. There's the one where it's sort of more low to the ground, like you see on the screen. We aren't using towers in here. We're utilizing earlier characters. We've got Smee, Argus, and Captain Hook, and we're just basically fighting for the board early to mid range. You've also seen, if you see Sky's list, like an amazing player, really worth checking out his list as well. He's utilizing the Kronk card, which is a 4/5. It's the same body as Tinkerbell. The only difference is it doesn't have an on play deal 1 damage across the board. It just has resist, and that's very good for protection against Zeus. It requires them to double spell. They'll have to Zeus, let the Storm Rage on, or Strength, so it'll require more combo pieces for them to have it. And you pair it with a Cogsworth, and it's getting 2 resist, and it's just a very strong card that's going to be hard to remove. But yeah, this one focuses more on, we're playing low to the ground, we're not playing Tamatar, we're not item spamming as much. So we're looking at Aerial and Bell to sort of give us those win cons. And then what we want to do is protect the board by playing Pete. So we go wide, play a lot of characters, get a lot of lore on board, then we play Pete and just keep it alive. And you could probably swap that Simba out for a Kuzco as well, just because basically Kuzco will be doing a very similar task, but it also quests for two. Um, we don't have the Zeuses in there. We just have a couple fire the cannons. We're trying to fight for the board of characters a lot more. Arthur could be utilized here as well. But yeah, this is certainly a direction we're going in. Of course, with Steel Song being so popular and that matchup being fairly hard if you aren't prepping your deck and thinking about it as you go into the matchup. So definitely, yeah, this is a direction you can go in with the list. And of course, on the other end as well, we've got red blue, which is very, very popular. So you've got a list like this where it is utilizing the towers. We've got maximum items. We've got a lot of steel removal there. We haven't got much in the early. We're basically trying to get a tipple on two to get some things that we can get played out, like Grand Martala, a Hiram, so we can sing Zeus's, or we can still do the Smee into a Quill. So yeah, this is focusing a lot more on the topper end, and that will give you preferably a better matchup into the RB. And this is sort of, we're in a funny spot here because there's two decks at the top of the meta right now, and they're both very, very good decks. They have very good win cons, and they actually, for the most part, I'd argue they have fairly a 50-50 into each other as well, which is strange for a mid-range deck to have into a control deck. And what is also happening is the Steel Song is because it's so strong and it's so quick, it's being so good at being a mid-range deck. It's keeping the aggro decks out of the meta. Now the aggro decks would feed on the red blue if they were allowed into the meta. So we would have this nice strong circle of red blue. We say let's put red blue at the top. That comes around to eat the Steel Song, and then the Steel Song eats the Hyper Aggro, and then the Hyper Aggro eats the Red Blue. But the problem is, I'm finding that the Hyper Aggro just isn't performing well enough into everything. Even into Red Blue, it sometimes struggles. It doesn't win in that like really, really easily. If they get a Sisu down to take something out, and then they shift it, that's going to be really hard. And of course, if you're a hyper aggro list, you aren't focused on removal. So in other TCGs, you might be like, I can leave bodies on the board because I don't really mind about them as long as I'm gaining lore. But because we have this shift factor and we have singing and stuff like that, it is quite important when things are left on the board because they can do multiple purposes. They can keep the board fresh. So we're not really seeing this full circle here. We're just seeing two decks right now that are rising to the top. And I think maybe with the Daisy card that was added, they hoped, maybe in the game design, that we would have this lovely circle of an aggro-based decks, getting beaten by the mid range, and then the mid range getting beaten by the hyper control, because that is a very common stance for TCGs. They have this rock paper scissors thing, and you sort of, when you go into events or you go into any meta, you pick which one you want to be, the rock paper or the scissors, and you take your chances and you take your good matchups and you try and win your bad ones. Because really in a TCG, if you've just got one deck right now, I'd argue red blue is that deck that's just fairly good into everything, and the only thing that really beats it is if it bricks itself. You're in a kind of a rough spot. So yeah, it's an odd spot to be in, and the way I've been looking at it is I've been trying to do the lower to the ground build, and I've been trying to get it working, but I've had so many games where I've just missed a lot of that early pressure, and even when I've applied the early pressure with the characters, it wasn't enough to slow them down and to stop them. So overall, I'm not falling, not really loving it. And then what could happen if you don't have that strong early pressure to slow them down at the start? When you get into the late game, because you're lacking bigger things and lacking bigger stuff like Tamatoas and all the item spamming and all the control that you can pack into the other lists. you're just sort of falling behind and you're falling apart. And yeah, just overall, I have not found this one as much as useful. As well, like you can discard a dime and sort of feel quite confident that you could maybe get it back with a Tamatoa. In this one, yeah, if you draw a dime, you're just unlucky and you've drawn the dime too early, and you're gonna have to turn it into Ink Law, and then you're gonna have to win. Turn it into ink, sorry, and then you're gonna have to win based on characters. So play wide with your characters, then play your Peats down to protect them. So yeah, this is the build sort of I'm trying out right now, and I'm really much preferring it. It feels a lot cleaner. We're not that spread out on what we want to do. We just want to get ramp, keep the pressure applying. If we can go Porp, Tippo, Talo, or Hiram, we're still getting a lot of characters on board. We're setting up singers for things like Zeus, setting up a strong board. Then we put a Cogsworth on top to sort of lock in the board pressure. We've got a 5 cost singer as well, and we could just keep going from there. And then we can get to the Tamatoa, and we can just do burst law. We can just flip the game as we've been doing for quite a long time. And red blue has so many strengths for this deck, and the reason why it plays 4x Tamatoa is very clear. It's very good in their deck, but because we have in a sense 8 Porpsicles with 4 that are blue, 4 that are steel, I call them both. They're just both Porpsicles or Fortisphere, whatever it's called. They're basically the same card, and we can just spam them, filter for our deck, add in a few Talas to keep filtering, and we can just have this huge bit of lore. So I've just been throwing this one a lot more, just because the earlier pressure we're applying is not really matching what the rest of the meta is doing right now. Overall, I'm not feeling it's performing well enough, bringing those things in. But of course, there is a direction to go in, and I will not be surprised to see both these sort of lists do well. Or both these sort of approaches. Of course, for this one, you've got the Mickey because you're playing so much cheap early on, your hand's going to get thin. If you go Hook, Smee or Argus, and then you Tippo, and then you play something else, maybe a fire. Your hand's basically gone. So this one preserves the hand a bit more. This one, of course, you can do Porp, Tippo, and then recover the hand a bit of a Tala or a Hero in a similar fashion that the red blue does as well. And then to the late game, you can get the Tamatoas out. We've still got all the Tinkerbells. We've got 2 Zeus in there, 3 Fire the Cannons. So we have a lot of steel removal there. We have the Grab Your Swords. So yeah, I'm really liking this approach a bit more right now. But as I say, they're both sort of valid right now. Both have got players behind them that really, really hype up these lists. But yeah, I think it's worth noting that when you're building now for Blue Steel, in previous sets, you would have, say, like, let's say set 4. Red Purple was top of its game. It was still doing very well. It won like 2 regionals, and you could just be like, right, my tech is Argus for that matchup, and then my deck overall is just pretty good. We used to be able to just take the Steel Song matchup and be fine with that, but now with the amazing cards they've got of Flooding of a Daisy, which is basically a better version of Harps. So we did see that at the end of the last set, which were becoming tricky cards for us. They've got that. They've got Naveen for just to basically get free actions and get so much value. That deck's insane, basically. You can tech towards that if you're fearing that matchup, or more towards red blue, which has always naturally been our killer because we do the same thing as them, but we do it with steel. So we kind of feel always a little bit behind. But we still get some fun stuff. I think Pete is very good. The Fortispheres actually in this build is pretty good. We do a lot of more cycling through. We set up for a stronger Tamatoa. So overall, yeah, I think both lists are quite good. I quite like Tippo in this list because I found when you want to wheel, you can hand dump a bit better. So you have a quill set up, you dump, 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 play some Tippos to dump, sing Whole New World, even hardcast it if you need to. Set up to get like 20 ink or whatever you want to dime tap a Tamatoa on the same turn. Yeah, I've just been finding this approach a lot better. I'm finding Simba's fine, mainly because I don't want to be ramping my opponent. Yeah, and RP right now is just we sort of have to accept it. You can use Argus if you like. Argus and Smee is still good. It can test the Flynn on turn 2 because we can't forget that the Flynn is still quite important. But in this build, you've got Smee and Fire the Cannon. So if you miss a Smee on 2, you can play Fire the Cannons. And if you miss a Smee or the Fire the Cannons, you might be able to get a Tippo into a Grand Martala to contest it for that turn. But overall, I prefer the Smee or the Fire Cannons. And it's just this sort of issue that we're having right now with Blue Steel. Blue Steel is very much a reactive deck. It likes to know what the meta is, so it can be like, and I'll just tech for that. We're very much a toolbox deck. We answer the meta. We don't create it the way that Steel Song, where a card like Daisy creates it, or a card like Sisu creates the meta, because we all need to work around that. It's a card like Medusa. We all need to start thinking about that and building our decks for it, rather than we put a card in the deck and they're like, all right, I need to think how I'm going to beat that card. We sort of try and react to the meta. And because the meta is so wide, and like I say, the 2 top decks are so different, one's a hyper control, one's a sort of mid-range aggro-y list, we're sort of in this weird spot where we don't know which way to pull the deck. Overall, I think, as I say, we're a toolbox deck. We like to answer things, but we also can't forget what the point of blue steel is. We're basically doing the same as red blue. We're going to ramp, we're going to dime, we're going to win. But of course, as well, we can apply a lot of board pressure because we play steel characters a lot cheaper. Mr. Smear is probably one of the reasons why I never really jump off steel. I just love the card too much. I think it's too overpowered for what it is. Especially if you can wheel and just play a bunch of Smees. A bunch of Smees would still probably be better than a bunch of Daisies, but Daisies are so cheap. Um, so yeah, yeah, I think something's worth noting when you're playing this deck. There's a lot of preferences as well. Find which version you like more. I think a good example is Primor, who's an amazing player. I had him on the channel, I interviewed him. He's always said he's preferred to play sort of cheaper and lower to the ground. He loves to get a Smee and a hook out and start questing with them, and that's just his play. And he got to top 16. He's done amazing with it. And then we're seeing some of these other lists that 3 to 4 Tamatoa is very greedy at the top end, and they do very well as well. And yeah, I think you need to sort of play the list a bit more, find which one you work. They're both very good versions, I think. Both have their strengths. I'm preferring to play with this. I'm actually quite enjoying getting to play Tala again because I never was a fan of one jump ahead. So Tippo has allowed me to play these Tala lines and these strong turn 4 lines and add more turn 4 things in there. But yeah, I think it's very much when you watch my videos as well, or when you watch any of the content I talk about Blue Steel, I'm going to swap between sort of the two approaches that we've got right now because they're both quite big and they're both quite different in what they're trying to achieve. But overall, we're still ramping, we're still getting a dime down, and what I'm trying to say is, yeah, there's differences, but they're not as big as they are as they might seem. But definitely when you're building it, if you're only playing for your local meta, your store champs, and no one's on red blue, everyone's on steel song, you might want to look more towards trying to fight for the early game. Vice versa, if you're playing against a lot of red blue and a lot of red purple, you might want to go for these bigger Tamatoa lists and stuff like that, um, and fight more towards the late game. But I think still there's a lot of preference for blue steel, and that's a brilliant thing about the list. It still has the capability to 2-0 or beat anything. You just need to get the practice in, find what you like, find what fits for you. With the wheel, and just unlocking you so much card draw, so much ink advantage. You've got so much to play with there. So yeah, I think it's definitely a preference choice, but it's worth noting that Blue Steel right now has gone in sort of two different directions. So you might see a lot of varying lists. This might be similar to set 4. We had the no wheel and the wheel lists. I haven't really seen any no wheel right now. Right now, it seems to be dependent on, are we applying pressure early on, or are we going to apply it later on in the game? So yeah, just something definitely worth mentioning. And as I say, cool two lists.